Is that not?
It's not. No.
It's not?
No.
Well, I still need to have somewhere to stand and go draw the paper, so if you don't mind, I'll still work here in the corner. And while he's doing that, thank you for inviting me here. Thank you for having the Urban League come in front of you today. When Dalton introduced Midge Purcell, he called her the coordinator, and she is, but Midge was the driving force behind this report. She corralled all the researchers, all the people, all the names. She tracked down folks. She did a lot of the writing and editing. She worked with the writers and editors. So, I mean, this document wouldn't have been possible without her. So that really needs to be reflected strongly. I want to thank Dr. Johnson and the rest of the faculty here for inviting me, and just thank PSU, not just for giving me this forum today and giving the Urban League the forum today, but the fact that so many people at PSU contributed to this document. We had writers like Dr. Dalton Miller-Jones, and Professor Gordley, and Dr. Gibson. Some of you may know Dr. Karen Gibson in your School of Urban Studies. She did some of the economic work for us. We had the support of Dr. Beeble, who had just gotten here when we had begun this work, but he embraced that this was part of his city work and his kind of working in communities work. So he was very much for this. See if I'm left out on this list. And we actually had some.
Daryl Milner.
Yeah.
Oh, and Daryl Milner, who did a very big section for us, and is kind of the voice of the history of civil rights and the voice of history for African Americans in Oregon. If you want to know something about African Americans in Oregon, you ask Professor Milner, because he will help you. In fact, just as a side note, he had done our 50-year anniversary of the Urban League of Portland. He did all the research and the documentation. Now this was almost 15 years ago, because we just turned 64 this year and we'll turn 65 next year. But Dr. Milner has been doing this work for a long time, so thank you for that reminder. And we even had some PSU students work with us and dig around and do a little research for us. This was back when it was unfunded. We wound up getting some money later on, and we were able to get some help doing some research. But so PSU, in a very real way, is a very important part of this document. So that's why I'm doubly glad to be here talking to you all in this multicultural center, which, even though our report is the state of Black Oregon, it's really a multicultural report, because everything in this report that we present to you and we share with you about the African American community is happening, good and bad. Much of it bad and depressing and disappointing, but good and bad. It's happening to all of our communities of color in Oregon, and the solutions that we project and we'll talk about both in our recommendations and in some of these other sheets of paper that you just gave me is they apply to all the populations in Oregon. So with that, I will ask now. We have a video. Are we able to play that video, that DVD?
Yeah.
I would like to play the DVD now, and it's just a few minutes long. We actually have to give it to you before we can play it. Yes, please. And it's a few minutes long, but what it does, it'll save me a lot of talking, because it tells you about the report. You'll hear from some of the people in the report. It has some of the data that I would have just shared with you in a very dry way. And hopefully after that, I can just go through a few comments, and then we can have a nice dialogue. Now, our DVD didn't work for the county, so hopefully it works here. This project has been about 18 months in the making. As soon as this comes on, I'll stop talking. It came about because the last time we had done such a report was 17 years ago, and we just thought it was time. I had seen bits and pieces of things. Oregon Progress Board, the Oregonian would have an article. I'd see little elements of things, but I'd never seen all in one place the key quality of life indicators that suggested to me what was going on for African Americans in Oregon. So that's one thing that we attempted to do with this effort. think there's going to be very many surprises in the data. And the key data is that it reveals that Black Oregonians remain at or near the bottom of every meaningful social and economic measure. We collected data in about 8 areas: economics, education, health, criminal justice, environmental justice, housing, employment, child welfare, and civic engagement. And there's even a history section in there, led by Dr. Milner. But we haven't shown the kind of progress that other communities have shown, or that the greater Oregon community has shown in the last 10 or 20 years. Oregon is viewed as a very progressive, very innovative, very creative state, and we are. But less so for African Americans. I think it's about to begin, so I'll stop there.
The nation is asking itself whether we now live in a post-racial America. Our history shows that many African-American individuals have been able to transcend their condition. However, the reality, as our report shows, is that for our community as a whole, racial disparity and institutional barriers to prosperity and well-being still persist.
We must put in place specific programs to ensure that African Americans and other people of color acquire the skills necessary to compete for new energy and green collar jobs and business opportunities. Sheila Holden.
The official unemployment rates show that African American males are twice as likely to be unemployed than their male counterparts overall. The decennial census shows that African American male and female unemployment rates have been at their current level, roughly 15% and 10% respectively, since the late 1970s. Dr. Karen Gibson.
And for every day that I have served in the Oregon legislature, I have reminded myself of that reality, that the decisions that we're making affect what is happening less than a mile away in that state prison. And I'm also reminded, and I remind my colleagues, that many of the men serving in that institution are there as a result of the failure of public education.
These persistent achievement gaps and other disparities have grave consequences. Dropping out of school leads to a future of unemployment and underemployment. Differential treatment in the criminal justice system, decreased access to health care and limited access to college, all combine to limit the prospect of a prosperous, successful future. Joyce Brady-Harris.
So there is a gap in terms of educational attainment between these two communities. What are the reasons for that? First is financial. College is expensive. African Americans tend to not have the resources. The other barrier is academic preparation. This is, again, not a surprise. The schools that African Americans and other students of color go to are typically don't prepare them to do well.
%65% of the young people, and we're looking at young men incarcerated, are high school dropouts.
Oregon's annual per inmate cost is $24,665. and it makes it the nation's 24th most expensive prison system to operate.
What if we spend as much on social services as we do on prisons? How many crimes could we prevent? We could focus on education and generating meaningful jobs instead of sequestering as many African American men, women, and juveniles as possible in our prisons for longer and longer stretches of time, employ an assistant of quasi-bondage, Dr. Robert Thompson. To break these cycles, we have to surround our kids with positive influences. We have to let them know that it's okay to dream big, because it doesn't cost any more to dream big than it does to dream small. Gerald Whitecap.
State and community leaders must support efforts that reach beyond regulation toward creative responses that work outside traditional routes to homeownership and wealth accumulation. Dr. Victor Merced.
I begin to realize that I don't see the old neighbors anymore. A lot of them have moved to Gresham or farther out to where rents are cheaper. Once you get pushed out of your neighborhood, there's no place to come together. I don't know my neighbors, and the community is not as connected as it once was. Sherry Smith.
A commitment to racial justice must lie at the heart of efforts to eliminate disparities. This commitment to equity cannot be realized through race-neutral policies, which often have different implications for African Americans than whites. Tricia Tillman. If you have no support, the system just knocks you down. The whole dynamic tells you you're nothing. This is the kind of stress that affects your health and the health of your baby. Lasita Thompson. In Oregon cities, people of color are more likely than whites to live in areas with high levels of toxic chemicals in the air. Diesel particulate exposure has been a special concern since this soot increases the risk of developing cancer. States have found that recognizing the influence of institutional racism is a most important starting point in moving towards equity. We all know that racism is difficult to talk about, let alone to eliminate in a social system. However, without understanding its impact on the foster care system, we will continue to dance around the issue. Angela Cause and Corey Murphy.
As foster parents, we saw that our youth weren't being served. They come to us in need of drug and alcohol services and crucial mental health treatment. The foster care agencies wouldn't coordinate services, and the youth would leave us without ever getting the proper range of help. Philip and Cynthia Johnson.
There is this rich pipeline of young people whose attention we now have, and we want to let them know that there are opportunities for you to serve. You got to work hard to get there, and there's some organizing work that needs to take place in order to get there. But there are these roles in the state legislature and other elected roles that these young people can step up to. Most people don't know that there are 70 African Americans serving in these roles. At the same time, we want to increase those numbers. We will need people to provide testimony around education and around healthcare and around economic and community development. Whatever the recommendations are that come through the state of Black Oregon, we're going to need community to back up those recommendations and make them real.
Among the conclusions from the state of Black Oregon, The data reflects a consistent trend over decades. Social and economic disparities show deep-rooted systematic disadvantage. Structural barriers limit access to health, employment, wealth gain, and home ownership.
The state of Black Oregon is to inform, certainly, but it will also provide hard recommendations as to steps we should take to not only increase the quality of life for African American citizens in Oregon, but for all citizens in Oregon. What is good for Black Oregon is good for all of Oregon. Thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you for your attention, and I certainly hope you enjoy the rest of the program.
Probably shouldn't do that. So that's a lot of data to absorb all in one sitting, a lot of good information. First thing is I would encourage anybody who's interested in a full copy of the report, you can download it straight offline. We have it in a PDF format, all 160 or 180 pages of it. And there's some executive summaries that, if you stop by the league, I guess we can give that out and kind of encapsulates it. But the important thing is we want this information out there, and that we want to disseminate it because there's a lot of work to do. Why am I here? I'm really here for three things: to tell you why we did it and why I'm here, why it matters, and how you can engage, how you can be part of the solution. Because a lot of what I'm going to talk about, and a lot of what some of the people in the audience who are here today that you saw up on the screen are going to talk about, is simply the fact that there's a lot of work to do. It's a pretty bleak picture that we painted, but it's not hopeless. It can't be hopeless because we have a lot of work to do. We believe there's a lot of things that we can do, and one of the reasons why we even did this report was just to identify it. One of the drivers of this report was that we wanted real data, so we had one of the best econometrics firms in Oregon referred to me by the state economist as a credible firm to generate the data for us. We got the data, we had the essayists, again, some of whom are with you here today, and other specialists from around the state, mainly African Americans, who are experts in their sub-categories of knowledge, to write these essays and describe what's going on. And then I think what separates our document from others is the fact that we had case studies with real people talking about real problems and successes, both success and failure, and how being Black in Oregon is in their world. And I think from those case studies you can really get a sense of how this incessant drumbeat of life, of being a Black Oregonian, impacts people. The way I usually start off my talks about this lately is to say that it's exhausting being a Black man in Oregon, and it really is. It is hard because of all the things, all the small micro inequities and niggling things you have to deal with over and over and over again that majority populations don't have to inculcate into their days. They don't have to put it into their psyche, but you have to do that. And you do it and you soldier on, and that's fine, but it takes its toll. And so just that is hard enough. And then and what I hope our report points out is that then you start dealing with the very systemic underpinnings of everything, the things that affect you from a health perspective or from a financial perspective. Those things, which aren't just micro inequities, those are macro inequities. Those things are hitting you every day, and they're affecting the choices you can make on where to live, or what you can eat, or how you can thrive in your own community. So that's why I'm here. I'm here to highlight the data which leads to the real life impacts on people in our community, and to maybe let you spend a day in the life of what it's like to be a Black Oregonian and the things you have to think about or that you've built into your thinking every day. Because the numbers you hear about the economy right now, double-digit unemployment for Oregonians, we're in the top 5. I guess we're in the top 5 for unemployment nationally, but Blacks in Oregon since the 70s and 80s have been in double-digit unemployment. And it wasn't deemed a crisis then because it was only happening to our community. And the fact that it's happening to the larger community now brings us no joy. That's not a cause for celebration. Now you understand what we feel. All that is that it underscores the notion that we have to work together to solve the problems, and that if it affects one of us, it affects all of us. So, excuse me. Just stats on this page. You guys saw the stats, but they're debilitating. Just looking at the number of our prison population, the number of kids. Dr. Johnson was just saying in foster care, just the disproportionate representation of every one of these factors that determine people's quality of life. It is harrowing to think about how it's impacting our daily lives. I had a quote here from Dr. King, from Martin Luther King, talking about, well, I'll just read it, because I think it's an important point. I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And I had a couple other quotes about that, but all I really wanted was to underscore the fact that we have some great ideas, we have some great people, we have some great expertise in the African American community, but these are Oregon's problems, and we can only solve them with all the communities coming together. And I asked myself the question too, why is it that we, as progressive Oregonians and progressive Portlanders and progressive people that live here in Multnomah County, we're forward-thinking as modern Americans, why do we accept the norm as the norm, the notion of an achievement gap, or disparate life expectancies, or substandard housing choices, or economic divides? I don't see the outrage, and I don't see the urgency being marshaled to work on the solutions. And I don't just want to be a town crier talking about, oh, I can identify all the problems. I want to be part of the solution as well, but I need other people to engage and be part of that solution. And as uncomfortable as these discussions might be, I'm going to continue, and others in this room, and I hope most of you continue to initiate these conversations until we get people moving together in the same direction. Why does it matter? And why should you care? In Multnomah County, we're only 7%, African Americans are only 7% of the population, really about 6.6. In the state of Oregon, we're less than 2% of the population. And I've had a dismissive attitude with a lot of people. They say, well, why should we care? It's such a small number. But I give them the analogies of what if 7% of your family was terminal? Would you care? What if 7% of your employees were embezzling funds? Or for this being a university, what if 7% of your students were cheating on a test and messing up the curve? Or if 7% of your degree was left to finish? You wouldn't have a college degree, you wouldn't be considered a college graduate. What if 7% of your roof had a hole in it, and it was raining only in 7% of your house? Would you care about that? You'd care, and you'd fix it immediately, you'd fix it quickly, you'd deal with it, because you know that even though it's only 7%, it feeds into the whole body, it feeds into the whole house, or the whole degree, or the whole company. 7% matters. And I go back to Oregon's progressiveness. It's like 7% of Portland, and that's us. We have the worst health, the worst housing, highest unemployment, fewest businesses, live in the worst environmental area, have the worst child welfare, as you saw, and birth outcomes, and the silence is deafening. And I get upset because if black people in Oregon were salmon or a tree or a spotted owl, there'd be a whole lot more attention. And again, I don't say that to be divisive, because we have to find mutual pathways where we can care about the human capital and get the people taken care of. Even as I live here, I have children. I want clean water for my kids and green space. I want to have fresh air and non-toxic environment. So the environment is very important to me. In fact, Dalton had mentioned that our State of Black Oregon report is modeled off of the National State of Black America report put out by the National Urban League. But ours is the first And it happens in other cities. There's a State of Black Philadelphia report, a State of Black Los Angeles. Other urban leagues put out these reports. Ours is the first to include an environmental justice section, and because partially, yeah, I live in Oregon and we care about that very strongly here. So I'm not dismissing sustainability or green, as you saw up there. I want black people in Oregon to get some of those green jobs and know how to create some of those green technologies. So I'm very much a greenie, but I care about African American, I care about black people first. What can you do? You can do a lot. You can do simple things like finding out what's going on with organizations like the Urban League and other community-based organizations, many of whom are toiling out here in anonymity, certainly underfunded, certainly under-resourced, where your volunteer time could make a difference. It's not always about the money. You all are students and professors and community members. You have expertise, you have knowledge that might be easy for you to offload, but it would mean a lot to organizations like us. That's one thing you can do. I have a whole list of things you can do that was developed by Midge. Midge has done everything on this report. Stuff about jail, but I'll read you some of the recommendations though. On education, there's some specific things. You can help your school boards develop equity plans. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a school board meeting, not enough, but when I go there are very few people of color in the audience, and they are making decisions about your children and about what they're learning and about the color of their teachers and how much diversity plays into it. They're making these decisions about us without us, and you know, that you can't allow that to continue. And as students, if you plan on growing up and living here or teaching here, you need to be at those school board meetings too, and ensure that equity plans, not really just for school boards, but for everything, are built in. Increase the number of African American students in AP and college preparatory programs. There are, if you all went to Oregon schools, the chances are that very few of you were in AP, not because you didn't have the aptitude, because it absolutely wasn't even offered at some of your schools. And then this is where cultural bias comes in, where you were steered away from it or weren't given the information that would let you know that you too could apply and participate in advanced placement courses or IB courses. So you have to get more vocal, both for what you're doing now in college and for those you left behind in the other schools. The state legislature. You have Senator Gordley, who's a former legislature, but they have a teachers, standards, and practices services. You know, we say they should ensure all administrators and teachers are culturally competent. Well, that's a big bite to take, but we have to take it in small pieces and just figure out what we can do to help their standards be higher, to help their training be more significant and longer. You can't take a 4-hour class in cultural competency and expect, if you grew up in Wallowa County, where I've been, and it's a very beautiful place, to know how to deal with African Americans who grew up in Northeast Portland and interact with people in different ways. They have different ways of thinking and speech and interacting with people that aren't necessarily threatening, but if you grew up in a different environment, you don't know how to interpret that. You refer them, they get part of the system, and that's why you see those dropout rates go so high for African Americans, because once you start down the pathway of suspensions and detentions and referrals, then and then expulsions, that's a tough pathway to come back from. Employment, access to job creation, green jobs and support services, city contracting opportunities for businesses owned by people of color. That's a catch-22 when you're talking about business. Most of America is run by small business. Most of the companies in America are small businesses. And even more so, most African American businesses are small businesses. Now, if you're a contractor, it's tough to get the city contracts because they're generally larger contracts, and if they send a contract out to a large contractor, there's no tool right now that mandates that they have to subcontract or have a certain percentage of their contracting go to minority contractors. That's a bit of a convoluted issue, but you will never have a chance to become a larger contractor if you can't get money, get access to the money from your state, your city, your federal government. Now, you're paying taxes as a citizen. You're living in those communities and municipalities, and yet you can't share in the wealth, even though you have the skills, Your company just happens to be smaller, no less competent, just smaller. So there's got to be mechanisms in place. And yes, government is the place to start for that because they have a lot of contracts to let. They have a lot of people paying their tax dollars in there, and that process needs to be more equitable. Business will follow if government sets up the standards for this. Business always follows what government does. They do it in healthcare, they do it in other areas, they can do it in this kind of contracting. I got 4 employments, so let's really ensure green jobs and sustainability. Enforce requirements to ensure equity in contracting. Health, Multnomah County put out a study about 3 years ago that said 11 out of the 18 major indicators for mortality or morbidity for illnesses, blacks were leading, and you don't want to lead in those categories. That means we were dying and had more chronic disease in 11 out of 18 of the major categories: high blood pressure, obesity, cancer, heart disease. And a lot of this, as you saw in the video, is from environment where we live, the access to certain food that we have, and also just the stressful lives that we live living in a country, not just the state of Oregon, but living in a country that puts so much pressure on their communities of color. So we're going to expand. This is already being done a little bit. The Oregon Health Plan now covers 95% of the children in the state. This was just recently enacted in the last session, but we would like to see up to 300% of the federal poverty level folks who qualify to be put on the Oregon Health Plan, just because if you give people access to preventative care, you're not paying 10 times as much on the backside for emergency care. You all have heard this in the healthcare debate that's going on now, but it is very real, and it is even more pronounced for people of color. Join us on the path to learn. I mean, this is what I think I want to start winding down. Sign up for the State of Black Oregon task forces. Midge and others on the staff are leading task forces in every area that in which you might have an interest: healthcare, employment. If you have expertise or knowledge, or no expertise or knowledge, but an interest in moving the dial on this, then I encourage you. We had one session last night at Portland Community College where we were talking about these issues and narrowing down the focus, because we had 40 recommendations in our report. I guarantee you we can't work on 40 recommendations full force. We're going to prioritize that. We're going through that process right now. But we will have something in employment, we will have something in education, and we will have something in health. Without those 3 factors, we can't move on the other factors. We will have action going on in the other areas, but we have to marshal our forces and do what we can do and have some early wins and early successes and build on that. But your participation will be key in that growth. I guess the last thing I want to say is, and it's what we're, I think, basing a lot of our work on. Oregon, and I shared this with the county when I was talking to them, but it's all of Oregon. Oregon must establish a clear policy related to zero tolerance for racial disparities for any ethnicity. The policy should clearly articulate its intent to eliminate racial disparities and to mobilize the people, resources, community partners, and relevant jurisdictions to address disparities. This will be a call to action akin to, I mean, they put together things on a 10-year plan to end homelessness, the sustainability plan. They just had a meeting last night about the Portland plan, which I encourage all of you to get involved in. The Portland plan for the city of Portland, they have a bunch of people in the room, and you're all invited, talking about what's going to happen in Portland for the next 20 to 30 years. It's a 25-year plan. And I just talked to an associate of mine who was at the meeting. There might have been one person of color in that group. Now, I know there's going to be more than one person of color in Portland in 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years. And if we're not part of the discussion, we are going to get left out. They're going to make decisions without us, and it will not be the kind of Portland that people of color will be comfortable living in. So, but yeah, they have all these plans, East Portland Action Plan. None of these plans shrink from an ambitious goal. In the face of the global warming and global climate change, what do we do here? Portland and the county are finding strategies, immediate strategies that can reduce our impact on the environment. H1N1, so we're in the middle of H1N1 right now, and I hope everybody's feeling healthy, if not cough into your elbow, but H1N1, what did they do? They reassigned staff, they allocated funds, they shifted workloads, they put masks and hand washing, they mobilized, and they dealt with it instantly. And H1N1 is important, but there's nothing more urgent than what we're talking about in the state of Black Oregon. It's back to the human capital, back to the people of Oregon. I would like to see them mobilize just as quickly for us. The impact of disparities on the African American community and Oregon as a whole is no less urgent. It's exponentially more persistent, prevalent, and consequential. We expect our elected leaders to take on this challenge like the others, with courage and with sound planning, with the right people and resources. I'm going to take Dr. King's words and just close and say, it will take sublime courage by this body and others in the state, and the Urban League of Portland is here to help you and achieve that goal for all of our constituents. Because I think Dr. Miller-Jones said earlier, you know, we have some ambitious goals in there, but every one of our ambitious goals in the state of Black Oregon is an achievable goal. And we will make it there with your help. So those are my comments. Thank you. And I would encourage questions from anybody and everybody. Yes, ma'am.
Me?
Yes.
I have a comment and a two-part question. First of all, thank you very much for a very articulate speech. My comment is that our public educational system needs to be revamped on a nationwide level, not just on a local level, on many different levels. My two-part question is, how does Portland compare to other comparable cities with a similar Black population as far as unemployment, education, housing, etc.?
Well, my answers will be a little generic. Now, I've looked at some cities, among them Austin, Texas has about a 7% population, and I've looked in other cities that have urban leagues, so I'm able to get that information from my counterparts there. Austin, Texas has a similar population. Denver, Colorado has a slightly higher African American population, but for size, and Denver's a little bigger than us too, whereas Austin is about our size. But in those cities, and there was one other which I can't recall, but I sent out a kind of an all-points bulletin to the urban leagues when we were doing our report. Oregon is not faring as well as those two. In fact, the third one, it wasn't faring as well as them. I'll remember in a moment the other city. But for housing, we were not as good, and for health, we were not as good. Which, you know, when I shared our stats with others, they were amazed. And our dropout rate is higher. The education piece, our dropout rate is higher. And when I shared that with them, they couldn't believe it because, again, you know, without bashing Oregon, because I love Oregon, I live here, but they have this image of Oregon as being super progressive, super open-hearted, super liberal, and a super place to live. And it's all of those things, but it's less so for African Americans. And so those stats are pretty startling, but we're not doing as well as those other cities. But it wasn't a scientific survey, it was just, you know, checking with my counterparts. Professor Gordley.
Thank you. I would like to first acknowledge that Marcus Mundy stands before us as an example of exemplary leadership in our Oregon community. And I would also once again like to acknowledge the chair of our Department of Black Studies, Dr. Kofi Agorsa. And I also want to acknowledge my colleague, Dr. Ethan Johnson, for his hard work and thoughtfulness in coordinating the Black Bag series and working with all the good folks who made today possible. And I want you all to know that the course that I teach and have developed, African American Leadership and Community Development, The foundation for the course is the state of Black Oregon. And in that course, we are unpacking the essays, we're unpacking the data, we're meeting with the folks who wrote the essays, we're out in the community, we're attending the African American Alliance meetings. It's a requirement that my students attend those meetings. My students are participating in the Portland Development Commission, Northeast Economic Development Advisory Committee meetings that are currently taking place. That committee is charged with deciding how $400 million will be spent in advancing the needs of the Northeast community over the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And my students are engaged in that process. They're participating in those meetings, and when the public comment period takes place during those meetings, my students are at the microphone sharing their observations and again actively participating in that process. So again, I want to make you aware that the course is available. We're toward the end now for this term, African American Leadership and Community Development, but it will be offered again next term, and I hope to see some of you there. And please pass the word on. And I'd like to ask my students who are currently in the course and who have taken the course before to please stand and be acknowledged. Timothy, who else is going to thing I want to say about civic engagement, and this is my observation from having served in the legislature for 17 years. There is a practice called nepotism. You all know what nepotism is? Yes. It's when you hire your mother, your sister, your brother, your cousin, your family members. And that practice serves as a barrier to the participation of other Oregonians who should be a part of the pipeline, that pipeline. Let me break it down for you. There is a state statute that says Oregon shall be a leader in the practice of affirmative action and equal opportunity. But that statute is being abused by legislators who currently hire family members and do not have, and this is not all legislators, but it's many of them. And you need to check with your legislators and find out what their hiring practices are in their offices. What I'm saying to you is, your opportunity to serve as a legislative aide and to learn the process and to get that foot in the door is inhibited by the fact that we have this practice called nepotism. And we need to call that out. We need to talk about it. And we need to hold legislators and other electeds accountable for how they are currently abusing the hiring process. And again, that's a pathway to participation, or it should be, in opening up the legislative process. I hope I'm making myself clear. And that's one of the things we can all work on, and to break down that particular barrier.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, my name is Sammy Alloy. I work for PSU, and I want to let people know that students here at PSU are hungry for a diversity studies requirement. We're hungry for cultural competency training for administrators and faculty members. The Oregon Student Association has recently conducted a survey of students of color about the top priorities issues that students want to be working on. And after the DREAM Act and tuition equity, cultural competency trainings and ethnic studies requirements are numbers 2 and 3. And students need the support and guidance of all of you to make those things happen. And I want to remind everyone that President Vivell is holding a PSU forum on Friday from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. I think it's in the ballroom. And so please come and voice these concerns, because PSU needs to be addressing these concerns that came out in this document. And I want to once again thank you guys for putting this on. This is a great event to have at PSU, but we're active, we're getting mobilized, and we need everyone who believes in these things to get active and mobilized with us.
My name is April Johnson. I had a quick comment. I was concerned. Most of the reason why I came here was concerned, period. It's pretty traumatic sometimes being African American in the city. And your comments about, or the panel's comments about the education system. I have a 15-year-old, one child left in the school system. We moved to from Georgia a couple of years ago. I'm fighting with that system at this point, not like in Dukes or anything, but just in terms of trying to make sure that my son gets his needs met. He came here in his 7th grade year. He's now a freshman at Grant High School, but he had to repeat pre-algebra. He got put in a lower track immediately, fast track to a lower track. He repeated pre-algebra in 7th grade after having it in 6th. Now 8th grade he goes back to Beaumont and they stick him in another pre-algebra class. I go up there and fight. They tell me, well, he doesn't belong in algebra because he didn't pass his scores. And I'm going, but he meets exceeds grade level. He got an A every term all year. He came here with an A, but he doesn't meet algebra requirements. So they transferred him in by the middle of October. It took him that long, so he had to spend the term catching up and moving on and so forth. But he finished the term with a B+, and then he ended last fall with an A, honor student, graduated, went on the grant. Now he's back in another algebra class. He didn't get full credit for last year, and he's supposed to be in geometry. Now in 10th grade he starts to take tests, ACT tests for college prep and this and the other. And my concern is that every single year I'm having to fight for my honor roll student who's African American to be put in proper mathematics classes so that he can excel the way he's supposed to and get what he needs in order to meet his standards so that he too, and other children, have gone to college. When you mentioned the school board meeting, I'm at the school board meeting because I'm too damn busy fighting for little stuff like this, and it's exhausting. So now what I have to have, now what I've done is my son is now, I'm big on education with my children because I grew up in a family that was like that. So I put him in a science and math club at Grant. He's the only black kid in there, so of course he feels awkward. He doesn't want to go, but I make him go. He's not going to go awkward, right? So he's the only black kid in the science and math club. But that's because he's missing a whole year of geometry right now. He won't get it till the 10th grade, and it will affect his scores on his ACT test. So I'm having to hire a tutor for him to teach him geometry over this next year so that his scores for next year, for example,
Caroline.
I'm not a conspiracy theorist.
Second time. Hey. Second time in a week.
Thank you so much.
How long ago was it?
It's about creating space for around domestic violence.
Yes, I did.
You know,
I did. I'm sorry I didn't respond.
Oh, that's okay.
But I did get it.
Coming out here.
And I actually, yeah, I would be interested in that.
Yeah, because we've had a couple of suicides.
Yeah.
Dramatic.
Yeah, I'd be interested in that. So
Hey.
tell them
What are you doing now?